Welcome everyone to, which I think is the 67th FMBug.
I think it is 67th, yeah.
Which quite amazes me. But it's good to see everyone here and so many of you coming back for it, which means we must be doing something right, I hope. But as I'm sure Gary would also say, this is your meeting, so if you need us to change stuff, talk to us and we'll see if you can accommodate that change. To which end, we're slightly different tonight. We are, well, I was going to do a presentation, but I think I might actually stick it in at the end if we've run dry, because I haven't quite finished it.
Okay.
So we'll have Gary introducing the news, because I'm sure he's got loads of news.
I've got reasonable amount this week, yeah, not too bad.
And then we're going to just go on to a kind of free forms schedule. John is going to talk about some interesting things, which he's entitled "Eat Your Own Dog Food" in a very John way. Like it, John. But basically, he's going to talk about some of the things that we use for day-to-day setting up of our systems, monitoring, whatever, and making sure that we've got what we need. And I'm really looking forward to that, actually. And then I think Gary and John will probably have a discussion about something that John introduced a few meetings ago, 3 or 4 meetings ago, 2 or 3 meetings ago, talking about the single files and the advantages of using a single file against the disadvantages, which Gary is very well versed in, because he's got many files. And huge amounts of data.
I think that's the point. I missed that point in that discussion of that event, and I spoke to John earlier, and we thought we'd put it out as a forum just to have a discussion about it. So it'd be a group discussion about that topic, and I can give some real scenarios of why I do certain things certain ways, and that's the reason behind it.
Yeah, but I think it'll be a good kicking off point if you two just talk about that, which is great. Yes, I wasn't trying to imply John had got anything wrong, because he certainly would never get anything wrong.
Definitely hasn't. He definitely hasn't.
I certainly wouldn't be suggesting that he had. So yes, it's kind of a free-for-all session, and people are free to jump into the discussions, I think, pretty much whenever. As Gary said, please at least try and have a picture so that we get more people on the recording. And I think probably, I haven't talked about what's after the virtual bar. We have a little item after the virtual bar, which you're going to have to wait for the virtual bar for.
You'll have to come to the virtual bar to see that item. Yeah, definitely. You have to attend the virtual bar to see it, and that's all we're saying on it. So you can stick around if you want or not. Don't worry. I'm not doing anything untoward. That's fine. It's perfectly safe.
Keep his clothes on.
Clean. That's fine. Yeah, it's perfectly safe, perfectly clean. I'll have to edit that out of the video. We said this before. You say anything like that on YouTube, we get banned. So I'm going to have to edit that out now. So,
sorry, Gary, giving you more work.
That's all right. No worries. That's fine. I can do it. So I'll kick off with the news then, if that's the case. So I will present this, and hopefully you will see this. Fingers crossed. Please tell me you can see that. Yeah. Hopefully you can. Fab.
Yeah,
right.
See that.
The news. There's a reasonable amount of news. Everyone's been busy over Christmas, and they posted a reasonable amount of stuff out. First thing I want to kick off with is, since our last event, there was a post by Claris about developers are excited to use FileMaker 19.6. There is a good article there about what people have been saying. There's well-respected developers in the industry talking about the benefits of what 19.6 delivers. And I went through some of it. A couple of posts by Todd Geist, Vince has commented on there about how they're looking for the benefits of what it brings. And I thought it was an interesting read. It's not a massive article, it's quite short, but it gives you some of the key things that they're releasing and the reasons why they're releasing it, and how they see the industry moving forward, certainly with an alignment of what Claris is trying to do. So I thought it was very good. And the little intro there from obviously Brad about what they're doing with the platform and so forth. So that was the first thing I found in the news, which I enjoyed reading. There's something else I found, which is on FileMaker Hacks, which is the summary field bug and workaround. As you can see, I've posted the snippet of the information that was mentioned in the article. I thought this is quite useful to read. It just shows there's a bug in, because the server is now calculating the summary fields. There's a point that I was shocked that it will calculate the summary fields based on the following things being met. Now, that's quite a detailed list of things that need to be met. Now, one of the one I was concerned about is the host CPU not higher than 25% when the summary begins, otherwise it won't calculate them. So it's interesting to see that there are limitations on how that architecture is working to summarize the fields is based on some of these constraints. So I wasn't aware they were all there. So that's something, if a sort is not in progress, so if you do a sort, it'll stop the summary field. That sort of makes sense. I'm fine with that. But I was surprised with the CPU one, because I would have thought, well, if the task was running on the server and the server had resources anyhow, if it's at 30% resource, you won't get the summary field being calculated, which I thought was amazing. So I know I manage my own servers and I monitor my own servers and make sure my resources are adequate, but I say adequate. I'm probably trying to run my servers efficiently in our VM infrastructure, that if they're running at 50%, that's efficient. I can tell you VMware quotes that you should be running all your hosts at about 80% capacity most of the time with peaks. So if that was the case, I was running my FileMaker server at 80% all the time, no summary field would ever calculate. So it's a bit of a wake-up call. So I didn't know whether you knew that. The links in there. As I've said always before, all the links I will be posting in the chat after I've done my news section. So I'll post all the links in the chat, and then Jul will pull those and you'll be able to download them off FMBug site. So have a read. It goes into more detail about how to get around it. There's a way you can then force the update to run in certain times, but it's an interesting read, but I didn't know there was those constraints on the way it worked. The other one, which I think was obvious, but it's something to bear in mind, that if you're trying to run FileMaker Pro or Server on an older version of the OS, then if you don't have APFS enabled, you will not be able to do it anymore. So they've changed the disk formatting. So extended, journaled extended is not compatible. So if you had a slightly older OS, you won't be able to run it. But this sort of goes in hand with running like 19.5 or 19.6 if there's a minimum requirement. I've yet to look this up and see whether the minimum requirement that FileMaker saying relates to I could get it to run a different version of the OS format. But I think it goes hand in hand, but it's just something to bear in mind that anyone that's attempting to install it on an older machine, do bear in mind the disk format needs to be APFS. So, and that's for both server as well. The other thing I went through this week's events is I went through the Claris engineering blog. There's a couple of points in there that have been posted in the last few months, which is very good. Why Linux and why Ubuntu? It's a great little article about why Claris is picking that as a platform to run your servers on, as opposed to Windows and Mac in that respect. It does go into a more detailed breakdown of why they picked it and the benefits that Ubuntu brings to the platform. The one thing is I spoke to my Linux engineers and they're a little concerned with the LTS only release, because I looked at it and it's about, I think about 9 months behind the official latest release of Ubuntu is what FileMaker is supporting. So, and that's because the LTS is the long-term supported version, but there is a lot of patches in Ubuntu that isn't in the latest LTS yet. And FileMaker seems to be the one back from the latest LTS. So it's not to say that's a bad thing, it's just to bear that in mind. You may not be running the most up-to-date version of Linux if you're running your server, because if you do upgrade, you may not be on the latest LTS release. So do have a look at that, read the article, but they do explain in details why they've picked that platform, and I totally support it as well. And I can tell you now, I'm looking to move to Linux this year and move away from Windows, so, for that reason. It's going to save me a heap of licenses for my servers. And everyone I've looked at and read in the industry is saying the performance is not any majorly different with Linux that I can see. The one thing that is the disk access seems to be a lot faster that I've seen and tested so far. Windows just seem to have be dying for me at the moment because the volume of files I'm putting on there. So certainly have a look at the Linux platform and see, but if you can move to it, then I would. The other one is in the latest version of FileMaker, they are doing a public key infrastructure authentication, which is very good. So as it clearly states there, the benefit of this is you could admin the server if you've got a token, and it means if you've got the token, they can change their admin accounts and so forth, and they can move around. The token is the one that authenticates them. So this is a way of authenticating with the server in a structured way. Token's very secure. So again, if this is something that is useful to you, it will be worthwhile you having a read of this and understand how the technology works. Not everyone does keys and tokens, but and it's not fit for everybody. Some people may like it, some people may not, but it could be very useful, certainly for accessing the API. If anyone's trying to then push responses via FileMaker via the API, you can do it via a token, which is much better than doing it by username and so forth. So.
Yeah, Gary, I set it up on my dev server last weekend. It was really easy to set up and seems to work really well. Excellent,
brilliant, superb, thank you. The other one is obviously updating records. We've, as Doug mentioned in the last event, part of the latest release in 19.6 is the fact that you can do transactions. This is basically a post to explain the technology, which Doug did a very good job going over last time with us as well. But this is something as a reference point you could go back to, and it explains the process of the transaction scripts and various error functions that you may want to use if you're using transactional reporting. I've yet to dip into this and play with this, but I know this is something that sparked my interest, certainly, because there's some factors I could use within what we've built. Transactional logging could be very, very useful. So, and processing of records via transaction basis will be absolutely key to what we're doing. So it's something I'm hoping 2023 gives me a bit more time to actually play with this stuff and look at it. But we will see. But I'm certainly backing the route that Claris is taking for this. I think this is certainly the right approach. So. And then final one is it's started. It's the new year. It's 2023. There's some dates for you to stick in the diary. So. There's .fmp, which is the 1st of June. There is a Claris update that's coming the end of this month, actually. I think it's next week, 25th. There's also there is a 26th, but I couldn't seem to find the link from the Claris events page. I don't know why. But I can get to it from FM Soup's page. They've got 2 links on there. One goes to the 26th event, one goes to the 25th, but I can't actually find the 26th. I don't know whether Claris is doing, if the 25th gets oversubscribed, they'll move you to the 26th. I have no idea. There's only one link on the Claris page. You might want to make a note, Rosemary. So,
Gary, just to get back to .fmp, that's registration for that is now open.
Yes, it is. So, and then there's the FMK one as well, which is the German-speaking event that's running. That's on the 21st to the 23rd. It does say on there that if you're not German speaking, you can still present, and it's still worth going. There is plenty of English speaking stuff that's going on there as well, but primarily the event is German speaking. But it's have a read. If there's content there that's of interest, you can still attend, you still learn. And they're the 3 key dates that I've found in the calendar so far. I'm sure there will be many more that will come up in other events that we do.
And just to give you some clarification on the webinar, the Claris update webinar. So US time, we're doing 2 sessions on the 25th, one at 9 California time and one at 4 California time. So I think, and so when you see the 26th, that's because that's the late session, early or mid-morning in Australia.
Maybe that's the reason why. Thank you very much for clearing that.
Yeah, so if you're going to our event stage, you're only going to see the one that's a reasonable time zone for you.
I have no reasonable time zone. I've got 24/7, Rosemary. I could be able to join anyone, surely. Then as we
sorry, Gary. Rosemary, do you have any idea if the Claris Engage is going to take place this year in the United States?
We have a lot of high-level executive discussions happening right now, but we have not made any decisions yet.
Could you give us a chance, probability, so we can make our plans?
I am communicating back that everybody is interested and would like to be able to make plans.
Okay, so higher chance. Okay, thanks.
I add to that, Rosemary, is the fact that obviously we're not stateside, so we have to plan, we have to book flights, we have to get there. It's as much notice as we can get, certainly with the current climate of air travel. If anyone tries to book flights of late, good luck for one booking them, and you might get a confirmation and then watch in the next week they get cancelled again. So trying to plan a trip of that sort of magnitude is going to be problematic for us if we're not in the US. So as much notice we can get would be great.
On a similar note, is there any plans to have an engage in Europe? Because there was, before the pandemic, obviously there was going to be the Lisbon event.
That is also on the table and being discussed, but I don't have anything specific to report.
Thank you.
Rosemary, at some point
we'll wait for it to be done.
Rosemary, is there still any discussion about having a kitchen type event for Claris Studio?
I'm not I know there's been discussion. I don't know exactly. I haven't heard anything about that recently either.
I mean, the good thing here is that we're all quite keen to meet up by the sounds of it. So so you've got our interest, Rosemary.
Yeah.
Yep. And I will definitely be reporting back that there was lots of interest, and please for news sooner rather than later.
Wonderful. We wait. We'll find out shortly, hopefully. And yes, as we mentioned, it always the recording stops, the virtual bar starts, and there's a little presentation in the virtual bar that you might want to stick around to. So that's all I'm going to say on that one. So, but you're more than welcome to join. So that's the news. That's where we are. And as I said, keep an eye on the chat. I will be posting the links from the various things in the chat, and you can copy them or you can pick them up from the website afterwards. So, and that is it. Thank you very much. Over to you.
That's excellent. I think there's plenty of news there. Just before we move on to the next thing, is there anyone else who has got some news that we haven't covered that they want to just pop in there?
Yes, I just popped something in chat, and that is we are looking to hear from the broader community about what your current opinion is of the new Claris platform. And so we've got a survey out right now, and we would very much appreciate any candid feedback you want to give us about the platform, about how we're communicating about it, anything. And with the goal of this survey is to get a read on what the community is feeling right now, and also what we need to do to improve it and communicate more effectively.
Okay, great.
Actually, if I can just, Rosemary, if I can just touch on one point. You're asking for our opinion, but at this point, there's still a large number of developers that have not got their hands on it, and we can't give you an opinion until we've tried it.
That is valuable feedback. In fact, yeah, that is one of the things that we're hearing a lot in the survey. And so, yes, please.
Okay.
So do you want additional comments from that from people like me who haven't managed to get their hands on it? Do you want that just to fill in the survey and say that anyway?
Yep, absolutely. Like the first question in the survey is what's your experience? And then there's more questions after that. Okay,
thanks, Rosemary. Any other news or related items from anyone? No. John, are you ready to just dive in there with eating your own dog food?
As ready as I'll ever be, I imagine. I was looking forward to you doing a presentation first so that I could, read through what I was going to do. But
yes,
that's fine, because it's not a presentation as such. So. No, it's not a presentation as such. So,
yeah. If we run out of time at the end, I'll wing it with what I've got. But it's
so you should be able to see my screen.
Yeah.
Now,
All good.
that is the presentation. No, I'm lying. So the idea of this, so this is not a presentation. I promise I'm not going to talk about OData at all tonight. So there's a different thing. Gary and I were talking about an idea. So I'm kind of opening up my toolbox of things that I use, either because it may produce some useful tips or provoke discussion among people about whether they are doing these kind of things themselves and how to do them. Okay. So I thought the first thing I'd start with is a document that I have created for myself, which I refer to for all of my development. So it's my own version of, this is how I like to do things. I was quite heavily involved in those discussions that Matt Petrowski started a few years ago about FileMaker standards, which kind of went, well, it doesn't matter what your standard is, but if you have one and you know what it is, then first of all, you can pass it on to other developers, but also it helps you make some decisions. So the document, my version of the document covers all of the kinds of things we might do as developers, and just the way I have chosen to approach them. Some of this is sort of copied off things I downloaded off the net about 5-6 years ago. The point of it is not to go, this is the right way to do it. The point is that I have said, this is the way I've chosen to do it. I have thought about it quite carefully and I've documented it. I'm going to say it's really helped me in terms of just the discipline of going through that process rather than deciding ad hoc and at random, oh, I'll do this project this way, or I'll do this project this way, and then wondering why 5 years later and you come back to it, you can't remember anything that you did and why it kind of worked. So I'm covering, excuse me a second, before. I'm covering things like naming strategies for how to do that with fields and layouts, what my naming strategy is for variables and objects, how to handle naming strategies in scripts, custom functions. Styles is a bit more tricky because I really haven't yet settled on a way to consistently handle style naming, because there's not that brilliant a way to manage styles within FileMaker. It works, but it's not kind of easy to copy and paste stuff and include the style names with it. A list of all of the standard fields that I choose from to be in every single table, just so that it helps me to document that. How I've approached writing scripts, which in my case starts with a template script. So you copy and paste the template rather than just hitting the new script button, so that you've got some kind of framework in there, which definitely includes a header. And the discipline of that is it helps you to at least do some kind of documentation at the top of the script. So this just for me explains what those various things are doing. Then a method which says, okay, the first thing you're doing is setting up the context and variables. Then there's a whole, that's what we're doing. And at the end, there may be some results that you're going to kind of want to get together and pass out. I have a snippets script where I copy and paste bits of code that I can't be asked, frankly, to type every single time. And because there's every chance if you don't copy and paste it, you get it wrong. So that's everything from loops to how to handle various things. Like setting JSON elements when there's more than one, and you need to do it in bracket format. So just how all of that you've decided on the formatting should work. Noted down some conventions that I use that I can copy and paste into scripts with things like whether something should be turned on or off for deployment, whether or not this value is hard coded. And the advantage of that is you use any other kind of tool to search within your scripts, you can then find all the places where that bit of code exists, writing notes to yourself, all that kind of stuff. And if somebody really wants a copy of this, if you email me, I'll happily send it to you. But like I say, I'm not going, hey, this is the best way to do it. It's just, hey, this is how I'm approaching it, and maybe there's some value for everybody else. Decision that obviously we just now pass everything as a parameter as JSON, but I did previously have a choice on how that worked, so I've left that in there. And I am going to talk in a moment about custom functions. So every custom function I write, as well as every script I write, has a header in the custom function. Even if I've copied it from somebody else's site, I make sure that I modify the header so there's a bit of consistency about how the custom function headers work, particularly versions. I've got an approach to how I structure how both layouts and scripts are stored in folders and in what order and what are the kind of big containers for that. Again, it's about imposing self-discipline. Some notes about the default field file. So when you create a new table, it will pick up default fields. If you want to modify those yourself, that involves modifying the default fields file and storing it in a specific location under the shared users. That means you can override it. I have 4 or 5 different versions of the same file. If you copy from a subfolder into the parent folder and do new, it will instantly pick up what's there. So you can create some tables with a set of default fields, copy the blank one in, and then create a new table, and it has no fields in it for you. Because I find it irritating to create a new table and then have to go and delete fields that I didn't want. And then just copied and pasted the stuff that Todd once wrote about the order in which we should move code. So that's my document. At some point, be interested to see if anybody else kind of has gone that far of creating their own, but at the very least, whether people do subscribe to the idea that if we document what we're doing, I found it helps with new customers being able to say, I have a set of standards by which I work. And what this means is, if you have that document and then I'm not working on the project and you give this document to somebody else, they will be able to see quite quickly what was going on in terms of sort of that. How did they do that? How do they handle parent fields? How do they handle foreign keys? So just by documenting it, it kind of helps everybody. So that's item 1.
John, can I ask a quick question there? Do you
Of course, yeah.
You ever store that document within your solution?
No, some parts of it, some parts of it are in a couple of scripts. So some of the conventions are stored in a script called conventions, so that you can see. But this is a long form of that. So obviously, it goes into a bit more detail for me because it was designed to explain to somebody else how I was approaching the task. But there is a convention script in which I talk about that. We're not very good about reading those as other developers. If I gave you a file, I guarantee, unless I said, have you read that script, you probably wouldn't go and look at it yourself.
That's true.
So I see Beverly's hand in the air. Good evening, Beverly.
Yes, I have my mute off, so I'm speaking. You went through it pretty fast, and what I saw was pretty good. But the thing with the conventions always were either a disclaimer, is there warnings, is there, here's how to handle for when you're exchanging data with other systems that maybe have other, keywords or don't like the underscore or don't like spaces or don't like this and don't like that.
That's a great question, and not specifically, although I do know that. So I'll find a piece here that says the fields, no spaces or period, ASCII alphabet and underscore only. Descriptive, be aware of SQL and OData conventions and FileMaker reserved words. That's as far as I've gone.
Okay.
The clue here is in the word draft. Oh, maybe I've taken the word draft off. This is a growing document, so if that becomes a necessity, and that's a good point, I'll just add it, and then that becomes my current latest version of this document.
Cool.
There are some, it's not designed to be a how to do FileMaker manual. It's designed just to document my working practices and the places where I am opinionated at the very least.
Right.
So that I've written them down.
Thanks.
That's all right.
I said thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Or if not, we'll move into FileMaker. Oh, so as a result of doing that for a client, because they wanted me to, and forcing myself to, that has led. So there's a couple of. So the Eat Your Own Dog Food is how we use FileMaker to create files that we as developers can use, and that's not just other people's demo files, but it's stuff that we've written. So I have a custom functions file in which all of what I consider to be the golden master versions of the custom functions that I might regularly use are stored. So that's not the bit I need to do. So let's just go into custom functions. I'm going to pick that one because it's in later. So custom function, it's a header. That one doesn't return anything. So let's pick one that does return something. So we've got, it's always got the same type of header, and then the custom function. So I have, to be fair, written a tiny bit using ScriptMaster that enables me to copy that custom function onto the clipboard and then paste it into this layout. Well, run a script so it comes into this layout. But what I do when I'm doing that is I extract the version out of the header. So this is a tool for me, okay? If I update the custom function, the discipline is that if I update it functionally, I change the version number in the custom function in this file. If I want that to be, once I've tested it all, that this is now going to be the version of the custom function. It extracts the version number out of the header into a field. And down here, I've just written a really quick version history of what's gone on. Some of them are up to version 9, version 13. Because this is for me, it's about my discipline of what have I been doing with this. So there are currently 100 custom functions in the file. So just scroll through. Because I'm using ScriptMaster, I can extract from the clipboard what is essentially the content of the body and present it in this way. You have to do a bit of work to do that. I'm not going into the custom function, copying the body of the custom function and coming back here and then pasting it. I'm using the clipboard to do it because I want to extract some other things too. But actually, for me, that's not where the real value is. The real value is in this layout, which is a list of tests. So we'll just look at one. So this is just a drop-down list of all of the custom functions and the custom function's name. And I've got several fields on the layout in which I can enter parameters or the values for parameters. And this bit of code here, in this case, the custom function is HTTP status, refers to a field, which is what that is, and a script will evaluate that expression. So it will run the custom function with that as a parameter. And I have two things. I'm going to turn that off. So the first thing you have to do is go, if that is the code and I run that custom function, what do I expect the result will be? So if I put a result in there and run that test, we've got 2 reds because it has in fact failed, because that was the result. The correct way to do this is to put the expected result in first and run the test, not to run the test, copy the result, paste it into the expected result and run it again. That's not actually the way to test things, because you're not testing anything in reality other than your ability to copy and paste. But there are 431 records in this table. If I just search for all of those for HTTP status, there's 7 tests. So from various things, I've copied and pasted the headers that I got back from something, and I'm trying to find out what is the what's the status number. And I'm covering things like what happens if it's blank or some kind of weird value like the word squirrel. Is my custom function designed to cope with that? What result is it giving me back? And does it match? And so here's an interesting one: is that you can get this sometimes where you get a continue header. I talked about this a tiny bit last time. Actually, you get continue header followed by a 200 header. What you actually want to know is not what was the first header that was there, but what was the last result. I think the other one was here where we have a 302. Which means it's temporarily moved to somewhere else. So I can test the custom function against a whole series of values. The discipline then is, well, if you go and modify the custom function to change how it works, do some work in it, make it a new version, you then come into this side of the file and rerun all of the tests for what you just modified, so that you then know that the code that you have just modified doesn't break anything that did work in the past, but also now covers the new test case. Now, in discussion with somebody that I was working with, there was the whole thing about, well, what do you do if something fails? So I will just run.
John, can I add one thing to that? I noticed you've got different formats of platform in there. Have you noticed like you've got run on Windows, run on Mac, run on Linux, run on random, timed, other?
So I'm gonna do this one. I'm just running all of the tests for a second. It will take a few seconds. So the issue is, if you run this test, there may be a reason why it fails. If you know that it will fail, as in it's got a Windows specific path in it and you're on a Mac, if you know it will fail under those conditions, actually that doesn't mean the test has failed. It means you're in a known state that you expect the test to fail, and therefore actually legitimately it's passed in a weird kind of way, in the sense that I wouldn't expect this to work on a Mac. It's going to give me a red mark. If I then take it over to a Windows machine and run it, I can say, oh, that test, when I run it on a Windows machine, it does pass. It just will fail on a Mac, but I know why it will fail on a Mac. And so the categories of why something might fail are about platform, about whether there are either a random or a timed event in there. So if you're comparing something to a time and you've put a time value in the test file, then it's not going to work because it's not the same time as now. Now is not the same time as then if you're trying to do time comparisons. And then there's a kind of generic other box. So I'm just wait for this to go through.
So that
Should-
indicator
should
that's there is to remind you that it's basically platform specific.
Yes. So
Essentially.
if I'm running
Right,
this on a
okay,
Mac
cool.
and I end up with some things that fail, but they fail because they're Windows specific, then it means what I need to do is go and find a Windows machine and just check that that those all work. So if I find the things, for example, that have got a Windows component in them, so clearly something which kind of change, in this case, I don't need to use this anymore. This can be deprecated because we now have FileMaker functions to clean up paths. But if I'm cleaning up a path and it's a Windows path, C/Windows documents, and the custom function, because I'm running on a Mac, gives it me back as if it's a Mac path, that clearly is not correct. But it's not because the custom function has in fact failed at this moment in time. If I take it to Windows and it doesn't work either, then it's not working properly. But it just means go and test it somewhere else, please.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so effectively, while it has failed, because there's a known failure, in their case, for this people I started some of this work for, they can treat it, you can treat it as a pass. So documented how I approach the work, and then I've added my own bit of discipline that says, hey, here's a file in which all of this is stored. If I change custom functions, I make sure the documentation is correct so that I can go and see. So this should show me and will show me. Let's go to HTTP. So instead of having to go into the manage custom functions dialog box to read what it says, that's the content, so I can see what I'm doing. And if I find a case where I probably should modify it, I can at least see what the custom function is doing before I even go. Because that's a modal dialog and you can't get out and you're stuck in it, just helps me. If I modify it, discipline is go here and set up a new test, run the test, check whether it works, check whether all of the other tests for the same function still work. I have caught myself out in a really good way. I have caught myself out a few times by making a change that broke something else. And so if you got it right here before you go and paste it somewhere else, then that's a good thing. I happen to believe. The other thing I did just then add into the file was, the limit on 30,000 characters, being able to copy and paste into a variable when you want to paste a JavaScript library into a variable. So this is a field, paste a big piece of text in there, click the button to create a step, tell it what variable name, and it copies it to the clipboard, go into your script, and you can paste that where you can't paste the 30,000 plus characters in. So it's a helper file for me, but it gives me a lot of discipline. Any questions on that one? Any more questions on that one? No?
I think from the version control stuff, I think that's really useful because at least with this, you've got function history, version 1, initial 2, like 1.1 copies and adds to that. It's certainly something we need to look at because we do a scrape of Amazon content using custom function. The reason why is if you're doing a HTTP scrape of Amazon, they change that basically weekly.
Yeah.
So it's remembering what the hell changed from last week to this week and then make it work again. So it's a constant backwards and forwards with Amazon. They keep changing the code content on there. So this would be useful. I'll talk to Ben and try and say, right, it's worth having a file. I think he's got a file for Amazon where he does that. So, but he's got it for one function, but it does make sense for all your custom functions to be in one place. Good.
So
good.
Here's just a quick example. Here's my one for just dealing with when you've got stuff that you got back off the web in Zulu time and you want to convert it into FileMaker time. This is a function which has grown over time where I've added, if it's got a second parameter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you then kind of add a 7th value. So I'm documenting what I've done along the way. Again, you then go back and test that it doesn't break any of the things that you had before, so that you know that you can carry on using your code. And the advantages, which I'm about to show you next, is because the version number is definitely in the header of the custom function, when you go to the file that you haven't worked on for 2 years and something doesn't work as expected, the first place to also look is, are the custom functions in fact the same versions as the one I'm expecting to use right now?
Hey, John, can I jump in with a?
Tony, of course. Yeah.
So here's a thought on versioning for custom functions. Something I've been playing around with, and I'd be interested to hear people's feedback. I have been appending, in some cases, for custom functions that are kind of work in progress, where I know like it's just not golden. It maybe addresses some use cases, but not all. So I've been working with a suffix, a numerical suffix, obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and much in the same way that you would change the endpoint for breaking change in an API. So I find that useful because of the visibility of the function name, because it's exposed. It's more exposed than the internals of a function, custom function. Anyway, I just wondered, John, what you think about that, or others?
So here's an interesting thing, Tony. If you have my custom function _2, and you copy it into another file where it already exists, you'll end up with my custom function _2. Because if you paste a custom function that already exists into the custom function list, because you have so many and you can't be bothered to read it because our eyesight is all getting dodgy these days, it'll append a 2 on the bottom anyway, and that may screw with your, oh, is this a second one or is this just a multiple copy paste? That's not a reason to not do it, but that's just a quick.
Well, I mean, that's John, that's a fair point. And I'd say the reason it's come up for me as an issue, and I don't want to get ahead of the presentation here, is that because custom functions are scoped to the file, we wind up having custom functions from the same series, if you will, perhaps different versions. And I would, for instance, perhaps be writing some code to, take a date to a string, and I might have it in one file in an earlier iteration that worked, and I might be in a new location, different file where I have a more recent iteration that's an improvement. And then I have to kind of ideally go back and know which version, which files have the inferior or non-consistent implementation and which files have the more. And I do think it is up to us as developers to be mindful of what happens when we paste code into existing solutions and note when it's already there. But it's a fair point.
No, I agree. The issue here is, I would expect, Tony, that you have your own internal discipline. I'm not saying, hey, my way's the right way. It's just a case of, hey, this is what I'm doing. Let's encourage each other to be disciplined in what we're doing in exactly that same way. Because the issue is, as you say, if file A has version 1 of this custom function and file B has version 2, then there may be some differences in behavior when you go back and program in file 1, file A, because you're expecting a custom function to do something which it doesn't.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's one of the most important conversations that can be had. And the last time it was done as a community was 2005. And were it to occur again, I think it would, what you're pushing or what you're promoting or implementing here, this kind of conversation is incredibly important. Totally agree.
Good, thank you. Anybody else? Or we'll just bat on unless you interrupt me. So my way of actually then dealing with Tony's interesting question is I have another file. So I am an FM perception user. So what this file does is to check custom functions based on you going into FM perception, having done a DDR across multiple files. You then go to the custom functions section and export all of the custom functions, which means it's all of the custom functions across all of the files. and as a CSV file, and then import it into this file. So I can show you this because I've made sure that this is correct. So this will say, these first 3 custom functions are in 5 files that I have had as a DDR together. But these 3 custom functions at the top actually have 2 different versions in that set of 5. And that's the use case that I want to know about. And that actually answers one of the things, Gary, about multiple files is making sure that you have copied bits of work from one file across all of the files. This helps in the custom functions area. So I'm just going to look at this one. So in this case, so this original file came from something that Todd Geist did, and I've hacked it somewhat judiciously over the top of that idea. So we create this, it creates a hash in the background of what the custom function is, and then goes, how many files have got the same hash as this? And in this particular case, out of the 5 files that the DDR was on, 4 of them have this version on the left-hand side, and this file here, this one file, has a different version. Now, it's not always easy to see when you're just looking at text what the actual difference is. So if I want to view the difference between the 2 of them, I have a JavaScript web viewer diff implementation, which I've hacked the original JavaScript file to do this task. And in fact, the difference is just in the base64 encode. In the left-hand version, the first parameter is set as 1, and in the second, it's explicitly set as 4648. That's the actual difference between the 2 of them. But I have visualized the differences between the individual files. So if you now go back and look in here, then here, that's the bit of code that I might have missed if I was just scanning it visually. That bit there, base64 encode RFC, is slightly different to that. Now, I've also faked this because I've given it the same version number. If you have 2 different version numbers, which I thought I had done, but just let me check. Oh yeah, so here we go. So this one is different. Not only is this one different, but I can first of all see that the one on the left, these 4 files have got version 2.9 in it, and this on the right has got version 2.7 in it. That's my first port of call. The version number is different, so I would expect that the one on the right doesn't quite do the same job as the one on the left. Let's look at the difference between them. Here's one we've got a bit more visualization. Well, clearly the date and the version is different, but in fact, I explicitly modified this so that if the JSON was empty, it returns the number 958, which is the FileMaker error code for missing parameter. Okay. Oh, and there's something else down here, which is actually the nub of what is different. I can tell you that in this particular case, it's all around when you have to pass quoted JSON to another script for use with OData. Oh dear, I just mentioned it. But that enables you to view the difference between those 2. But also, because this particular custom function has a master version, I can compare to the golden master version. The golden master is on the right here. So this version on the left, which is in these 4 files, is identical to what I consider to be my master custom function from the previous file. So every now and then I have to go and export that and re-import those values into here whenever I update stuff, so the golden master versions are the same. This has helped me out, I have to say, on a whole number of occasions. And something didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. And the first assumption is I must have done a really bad job, but it may just be that the bad job is the discipline, not our actual scripting or coding. The different colored dots indicate whether or not there is a golden master version of it or not, and whether it's different to it. But I do use this file quite regularly when I'm at the process of deploying a big piece of development work that I've done. Part of the discipline is come in here, run this, just check that your custom functions are in fact correct across both files. Any questions on that?
No, apart from it's very neat and very cool. So nice. I like it.
It's a scratchy bit of internal development file. It's not done for the purpose of it, it's done for me. It's about its function, but it does the function as designed to do. Okay, I promised Gary I'd show this one. So this is a file I have written to talk to one of my Wasabi storage accounts, which is where for several customers, we zip up nightly backups and copy them to folders in Wasabi. So it's just a file which says, hey, here's all of your buckets at a top level. So this would work with S3 if you're doing this. I'm choosing to kind of do it as Wasabi. And this folder, I happen to know that there's a bunch of customer zip files in there. Everything on the right is a virtual list. So I'm not creating hundreds of thousands of records in this file which match the files which are stored on Wasabi. Every time I need to show some information, I'm doing a query and saying, just give me back the list of files that you have, and putting them into a virtual list. So I'll just show you how it works for me. So I'm on this folder and I'm on this bucket. I've got these folders. I'm just going to refresh the data, and that's it going off, querying Wasabi and bringing back all of the files that I have. This is everything. If I just want to look at one specific subfolder within that, this is a list of the zip files in chronological order that are in this folder. So I'm seeing what the path is and what the file name is, size, date and time. I'm going to show you a different one. So this shows, so anything in red is less than 90 days old. And because my retention policy for this is 90 days, if I delete it, it doesn't get deleted and I'll still end up paying for it. So there's no point deleting it. Might as well keep it. If it's green, it's over 90 days. And so I can delete it. But I also choose to keep a copy on the 1st and the 14th of every month. That's just my particular method of doing this. So this is a virtual list in which I know what the files are. If I select these which are currently green because they're ripe for it, I'll now delete them. What it'll do is go off to the virtual list table and grab the record and then delete them. So I'm going to run the whole refresh again. And go back into, it was that one, wasn't it? And now we've got no green ones left, okay? Because they were actually deleted. So this is my way of managing all of the other backups. If I click this button, which I'm not going to do because some of these are large, it will download a copy from Wasabi locally, which I can then choose to do whatever I like with. In this particular case, I'm using it for zipped backups. So I'm not going to do that very much because some of them are kind of massive, but it does give me access. It does give me access to them. A customer who he's bought into the same process on his server. He does it. I gave him a copy of this file, just set up his API key, set up the first directory, and he can go off and manage his own backup copies. as far as he wants to do. You can download if the file is an appropriate file to do that. You can download a local copy of a file. So let me refresh that. So you don't see the data straight away, you've got to refresh it. So in this particular case, I've got a couple of photographs of my grandchildren that I might have downloaded locally. So I've got a visualization that if I click on that, I can just go and see the local copy of the record. Or local copy of the file. I've downloaded it local to here. I can then manage it by deleting the local copy or by deleting the remote copy. So that's yeah, that's what I wrote myself to do a job I was specifically after doing. But what I didn't want to do was to be managing FileMaker records that match the actual files, because I felt that was a way to get yourself in the twist quite quickly. So this
John,
query
question about the retention.
Yeah.
The Wasabi retention's what? 30 days, isn't it, by default?
It's whatever you set it to be on the folder.
Yeah.
So if you don't set it isn't there, you can set it to any number of days you wish. I have chosen with these folders to set it to 90 days for a variety of reasons, but not every folder has that.
Okay, and the retention. So the retention policy is one thing, the charge is the other one. That's fine. Why? So you're holding a longer term snapshot of each file on the 1st and the 14th of every month for just completeness for you. Is that the reason for it? Or if you
that might have compliance issues really. If at some point you need to go back a lot further, but you've got rid of all your backups, you can't prove anything about anything in the past. And sometimes we develop things in the past that we then later delete or remove or deprecate. And there may be very useful ways, there may be very useful reasons why you keep old copies. It's only a part of my customer portfolio that this kind of demonstrates this. These are the people I do a lot of development with on an active kind of basis, and I want lots of access to it. But
just to let everyone know that for everyone that doesn't use Wasabi, the retention period you can be, there is a charge over a certain time frame, but the cost is minimal. It's a pittance to hold something for a longer period of time. Yes, there is a charge.
It's an absolute yes, but the issue is if you delete a file that is still inside the retention period, it doesn't get deleted. It appears as if it's been deleted. It's still there, and therefore, if you have that with a very large number of very large files, you pay a different fee, and that can add up if you're not careful. We are, however, as Gary has quite rightly pointed out, talking about a pittance. I'm still struggling to get past $5 a month. Now,
that's the thing, because I was working with someone who was working with a similar sort of scenario to this, and they came up with a clever way of looking at it, going, well, if I downloaded all the old zips, re-zipped it and re-uploaded it, it'll have a new file with a new retention policy, and therefore you don't get charged with it. I was like, the time it's going to take you to download all of those buckets and resubmit them back up is not cost effective. Just pay the $3 or $4 and you're done, because your time alone is going to be wasted. So I like the idea of this. This is really cool. And you and I need to talk after this, because I might need to nick some of this. It's so good. It's really good. We use Veeam. We use Veeam to manage ours, and Veeam does a very good job, but we don't push FileMaker data into Veeam in that respect. So our buckets are VM snapshots of our whole infrastructure, which is great, does the job, but this could be really useful to say, I want to take this file and every night back it up and stick it in Wasabi outside the point of doing a whole snapshot of the whole server. So I like the idea of this. This could be really useful. Yeah.
So the other button on the screen will create a downloadable link that you can use or send to somebody else. So if it's their file, rather than downloading it and then trying to we send it or something to them. You can click this, which will create a downloadable expiring link, which you can then copy it to the clipboard. You can then email to somebody and go, "You've got 5 minutes. If you click this, you can go and get your file." As well. So they pay for all download, not you. That's that. Anything else? Anybody else? How long? You've got two choices: admin API or themes.
We got
admin API. We've got time to do both if you want, but definitely admin API.
I don't want to, you know, people can only take me droning on for so long, honestly. I'm quite aware, I'm quite self-aware, Gary.
I'm loving it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jul, genuinely. If you are not already doing it, so this is then using a FileMaker file to talk to the admin API is fabulous. Particularly once the number of servers that you're managing is more than one. Okay. This is, and there are several ways that people have approached this task. This particular file is the one that Mike Duncan has made available on his GitHub that I have settled on for the way I'm handling it. I kind of like it. I have also extended this file a little. So if you're not using one, we'll talk about why it's a good idea, and I'll just talk you through this one if you don't have any experience with it. So we've got a series of we'll call them tabs down the left-hand side, which we'll just go through. First thing is, so we're going to put in the server address. And I have made sure the admin API button is ticked at the top. So I'm going to put in my admin API username and password. Okay, so admin console username and password. And if I hit this, this will happen invisibly if I need it, but we're going to explicitly go, get me a token to do a bit of work. So I just click the button. I've now got a token back from the admin API, so anything I do would use that token for the rest of the time. If you click the delete button, that'll invalidate the token. It's just doing the admin API calls. It's just made it all kind of invisible for you. So what about the server itself? We've got what the current status is, whether or not it requires secure databases, cache size, max files, metadata about the server itself, whether progressive backups are enabled. So all of this is without having to go in a browser into the admin console. Oh yes, and some of this stuff is not visible in the admin console. That's the thing. It's only accessible either through the command line or through this. All of these values, so let's just go, this particular, it's my server, I can do what I like. I'm going to change the maximum number of files from 125 to 100 and click patch, and it's done, okay? So I have instant access to modify stuff, on the server. So where there's a green button, it allows you to get the latest values. Where it's an orange button, you're patching. New for this version, Mike, kind of every time something new comes out, we've got a button at the bottom that cancels the current backup. Again, there may be reasons why this is the best place to do it rather than trying to go into the admin console to do it. Databases tabs will show you a list of databases that are on the server. Those ones in the kind of brown color are currently closed, which you can see by the word closed. If I want to open it, then it's a patch to open a file. So I'm going to do it with that first one. That's happened. You can now see it's gone back and queried the admin API, and now it says it's running. So if I, in reverse, close it, then I have the chance to send a dialogue, and or I can force it. I'm just going to click force because I know nobody was in it, and it's now patched and it's now closed. Okay, so that's the databases tab. You can also query the, let me see what's on there in a sec. The fields file. If I just open that file and hide that away somewhere, and then do run, now you can see that there is a client just got into it. So it's not live, interactive live, but it does enable you to see what clients are connected to this server. In this case, the data API is, because I got a token for it, so I've got a user called data API, but I've also got me with that file. If I close that file now and do a get, that's gone away. I'm not in the file anymore. So it gives you a really quick way of being able to see how many people are in, who are they, do I need to kick somebody out, should that person be in. It gives you access to the schedules. You can turn those on and off from here. I'm going to say that the admin console, once you have more than 12 schedules, becomes a bit of a dog to work with, particularly if you get onto a second page. Going to skip the PHP thing. I can check whether the data API is on and what the current usage is. Sorry, tab above, whether web publishing is on/off. Details about the license, which is not actually possible to get from any other place, as far as I'm aware. Particularly some of the stuff around user count. So it's just pulling using the API. We're not doing it on the server, but you can modify the where notifications go. Not using on the server, modify stuff about external auth. Client settings, so those things that say what's the timeout, max sessions. Is OData on or off? So that, turning this on or off is the equivalent of ticking the little slidey thing in the admin console. It will tell me some details about the SSL certificate. I can, using this tool, use this to upload the, when I get an updated SSL, I can use this tool to do it by dropping the files in here and clicking a button. And it will also tell me whether plugins are allowed, what plugins are in, and what's on. And again, go and turn that off. So it gives me management of all of those areas in the admin console in a FileMaker file. So to do the same task across 5 different servers at the same, if I want to manage 5 different servers, you either have to have 5 browser windows open and remember which one you're clicking between, or you can use a file like this to do the same task across multiple servers. In this particular case, this file happens to manage 13 servers. It's a tool. I found it really useful. There are other versions. Other people have written. Claris has written one. Several other people have written their own version of it. But if you're not using one, I pretty much would recommend that that you consider downloading one and playing with it. Because it gives you the environment that you're used to, which is we love working in FileMaker. We don't necessarily love working in other people's web browsers. You can protect it with the password so nobody else can get into it. You probably ought to. It's transferable. Take a copy of this on your laptop while you're out on the road. It means you can quickly just do something on a server. You can just quickly turn a file off for somebody or when they go. So if you have the settings set that says don't automatically open the files when the server restarts, and something happens in the business and the electricity goes off and the server reboots, and then they've got no files open, you can really quickly get in and just open all the files for somebody if you're managing it for them. and lots of other
John,
examples.
John, one thing I'll add to this is, can you click on the databases tab for me, please? On this server.
Say that again, because you dropped out again.
Can you click on the databases section?
Yep.
One of the things is you can see the size. You can't see that in the admin console. You have no concept of the size of your databases in the admin console. This is invaluable, because if you see something ballooning, certainly when you've got this comes to possibly what we're going to get to in the next brief discussion about what John said about if you have a single file or multiple files. It's that thing of if you've got contained data in a file and then someone decides to upload 10,000 contracts into the database in one go, you watch that file balloon. This is invaluable. We use a tool similar to this. We don't use this one. I posted in there what we use. I like the fact that this one uses a token because the one I use doesn't. It's certainly something I need to look at alternatives. If you are managing multiple servers, we manage 5. Yes, it's invaluable. Opening 5 browser windows to do anything is just a nightmare. So it's a lot easier to manage your servers. It's also extremely powerful. Be careful. That's the one caveat I will do. There's a lot of buttons in this to say, just go do it. I've doctored one of the file we use that certain buttons you click it. I've put around the scripting behind that button, a security code you have to key in to allow that script to run. So they have to put a 4-digit PIN in to allow it to run, because it's too, just close all database files is a scary button to have a single button. You click it and it's just done. It's gone. So do bear that in mind. It's extremely powerful.
Behind the scenes, it's a FileMaker file with a whole bunch of scripts. If you want to modify the behavior, it's open. You can add parameters to the button in layout mode. You can go and modify the scripts. If my name is not Gary and my persistent ID is not this, then please show this dialog box on every single script that I run.
Yeah,
it's an appropriate
exactly.
It's an appropriate way to behave.
There is an element of that where I haven't given this to everybody for that reason.
No, it's in the same way that you don't give your admin console credentials to everybody. But it's about, as developers, the kinds of tools that are available to us.
One of the things on the file that I have, it has the a list of all the console commands as well. So I don't know whether that's in this one or not, because there's or whether they can run from this anyhow. So
it's not. So that one you put a link to is the one from Klaus.
Yeah.
In Denmark, I might have used that in the past. That's also a very good one.
It's very good. The console commands has got me out of trouble a few times, because you can then just tell it to go off and I would like to do the following. You paste it in there, and because it knows, the file knows your admin credentials, you can now just go straight over to the machine, open up a terminal window, and then just paste the details in. And it's got all the parameters in you need for your server to then action that. So if you've got we had an issue where the web publishing engine just wouldn't start, so I needed to reset the thing. So you can do that with the command line. So I then paste that in there, and it gives me all the credentials back to just go onto the server, paste it, and you're done. And you know it's going to function. All the credentials are correct. Right? But these tools are invaluable. They're so useful. Right?
This file here has a semi-permanent client. And on this particular server, I am a previous whole thing. I'm running Node-RED, and I'm tailing the event log. So every time there's a change, Node-RED is pushing a record to this FileMaker file, so that instead of having to log on to the admin console and go and look at the log, or do something like downloading it, it's a FileMaker file if I want to see what's going on with the server. Mostly this is around people who forget what their password is, and I need to see, yes, you tried 5 times to get in, of course you're an idiot. Obviously you don't say that to a customer in real life, but that's just what that file's doing. So any other, now this also, I've extended this so that you can, it will also run the data API. It will run data API queries in here. So if I, and that's the really interesting thing. So that's a bit of news for you, which is that value was there. I click get. The latest version of FileMaker Server has removed the build version and the date from what you get back when you say, what kind of server are you? So let me just see if I've got one was there. So it used to say the version in the string. It now doesn't say that. And the reason for that is potentially a security issue. It's if you know that an old version of the server is susceptible to something particularly, you could try and attack it. In the future, you won't know what version of FileMaker Server this is. That's a change in the very latest version of FileMaker Server. It's telling me that clearly I'm on an English thing here. I can get a list of the databases that are on the server. If I pick a file name from the list, let me pick that one. I can put in my username and password and get a token for it for the data API. Equally, I can put in username and passwords to be able to get OData access to it. If I do that, I'll do that actually, because I don't think it gives this away. Got a token, go into there, get the layouts. It's queried that file with those credentials and given me the layout names. This list is, of course, copy and pastable. That's a really quick way to get layout names without you having to go and log in and open the file. I can also get scripts, and using one of the layouts that I just selected from the list that I queried before, I can say that's a data API query. So it's like a mini postman within the file. So I can test what kind of values I might expect to see. And I've extended it so it also works with OData. So that's if you click the Data API tab on this. That's the admin API inside the Data API. I feel like I probably talked enough.
John, I have a question.
Yeah.
The size on the databases tab, is that the size of the database or the database and the containers externally?
That is the size of the file.
Okay.
The file, definitely the file.
The size of...
But if your container data was held in it, obviously it would include your container data if you were doing a single file and not external storage.
Yeah. But it'd be nice to be able to have the external container data size as well, wouldn't it?
No query could ever do that. I can tell you, I could break that query string if they did run that on our servers. Kill it.
Yeah, I guess so.
If you have them secured and you try and run a Linux, and it's on Linux, and you try and run a DF, you might as well go and have several cups of tea and a beer and a sandwich before you might get the answer back. So it's not.
No, you're right.
Not that useful,
it's a ridiculous number of files and folders, isn't it?
Yeah.
Somewhat. It's doing a job.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
No, it's great.
I think it's amazing. Great, John. Particularly like that last one. I have used one, but not as good as that.
So that last one, Mike Duncan, who worked for Soliant, something else is happening. I'll go and see if he's put it on his GitHub. I'll try and post that link into the chat, or if somebody else can do it. But
I've got it. I'll post it.
The version you've seen, I have hacked a bit, but then that's what we should be doing, isn't it? Taking somebody else's tool and making it work for us. Thank you, Gary.
And I think all that you've gone through there, John, has reminded us just what we ought to be doing. And many of us do a lot of it in our heads and don't document it, or we don't have those utilities. We keep meaning to write them or source them from somewhere else. So that's really good reminder, and to see how you're working, which is very efficiently by the looks of it.
Yeah, it's all smoke and mirrors, as you.
He actually does this for this presentation, but he doesn't do any of it. No, I'm joking. I think it's the point, if anyone goes away with one thing in there, it's just like little things. If you comment your scripts properly, that at least, even if you put the version number in your script heading, and then you can query your script between versions of file, that's enough to give you an idea of, all right, that was modified then. We aim to do this on a regular basis, but you do get lost in the melee of work that comes across your desk. You don't always then focus on it. But any one of those things that John just mentioned, I think if you take away one of them and go, right, I'm going to make a concerted effort in 2023, I'm going to do this, you will benefit from it. You'll get something out at the end of it. We're constantly going through a reiteration of what we're doing with all our code. Penny and Ben are constantly looking at it going, right, now we need to do it this way, we need to do it this way. I rock up at 1:30 in the morning and go, I'll just do a quick change because I know it needs to be done, and they scream at me because I don't follow their protocol. So it is worth doing, and you really should try and make an effort to take even one of the elements of what John said, and many others are out in the community of best practices or good ideas or things to follow. Not to say what John's saying is right, because he usually is right, but that's fine. But it's not to say that. Just find that thing that fits for you and use it. The admin tool, if you manage multiple servers and you're doing them manually by, I'll get onto that session and then I'll open this web browser. If you're doing it with more than one server, you really should be looking at an admin tool, because it's invaluable looking at your servers. All our servers are linked. So I have the problem that if I shut one server down, I'll have a dependency on another one and a dependency on the other one. So we've started looking in the admin tool of commenting that yeah, this server you can shut down on its own, but you can't shut server 1 down because it's got a dependency of server 2. So therefore, if you want to shut one of them down, you better make sure the clients are out of both of them, because it'll have an impact because the files are linked across the servers. So that really gives you because if you just go into the single admin tool, you're never going to know that. For that one server, you log in via the web browser, you're just going to see that admin console for that one server. You won't know there's a dependency on another server. So you can just put notes and highlights and bits and pieces. As you say, all these tools that the people have written are free and they're unlocked. They're there for you to edit. So that's the beauty of it. You can go around, put the security around certain buttons. You can make sure, I don't even want that seen. If you don't want it seen, copy the layout, delete a load of stuff off the layout, and then give that to the teams to work. If you've got a team that works on it, then you've got the reassurance they can't shut down the database. They don't have access to it. You can restrict it. So, whereas if you give them access to the admin console, at the moment, I believe this is coming with FileMaker, is the point that you can have different levels of admin control on the admin console. But for now, there's no way of doing that unless you use a file. So it's really useful.
Actually, Gary, just what you said there about the dependencies between the servers, one thing that you might want to look at would be doing that kind of starting up and shutting down the servers, possibly using something like an Ansible playbook, where basically what you're doing is you're writing code that would do it in the order that you need it. It'd be really, really consistent if you did that. So essentially the process
that's a clever way of doing it, So I would open server, I would say I could open, I think the way we do it, we open server 2 first, because you've got dependency on 1, open server 2 first, because it has to be open first, and then 1 can open. So I know it sounds the wrong way of doing this, but you wouldn't open 1, because if they got to 2, it wouldn't fail, if you see what I mean. It's weird. It's the way we've done our code across the servers. We've got 3 servers that are linked completely. Right.
So if that was done using sort of like a DevOps type tool like Ansible, essentially, because it would be written as code, start this server, then that one, and you could do it the other way when shutting down. And that
that's one of the things that, that's one of the things they mentioned, is the fact that if you don't have as John said, none of our servers, if there's a restart on a server, they don't open the files automatically for that reason. So
Right,
we
yeah,
have to open the database is fire. Basically, the console fires up, and then we go, right, we're going to open this bundle of these files, these bundle of these files. We know that's good. That's the solution fixed. Now I can open the rest of the stuff and let them go. So,
I do think, Ian, there's a presentation for you to deliver to us in the future on that, because the only person who's actually demoed Ansible to us was Steve Winter at the very beginning of Linux servers, and I feel there's definitely a bit I need to learn. So if you'd like to volunteer for that in the future, I'd be happy to.
I'd be happy to, because what do you think? That's kind of between Christmas Day and New Year's. That's mostly what I was doing. So yeah, I basically sort of writing some Ansible stuff because I was having some issues spinning up an ETS server. So I thought, if I'm doing this 10 times, I should just like write code to do it. So I just run the playbook.
Tick, BG, well done.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, that can go in next meeting. Perfect.
Yeah, happy to.
Head of the game, Gary.
That'll do. That works. That's a first. The next thing on the agenda was just a small point I wanted to raise, because I had John here, and as I say, I didn't mention it, which was the point of this discussion he did 2 sessions ago, which was about the benefits of a multiple file, single file, do's and don'ts, things to consider, and so forth. What came out of that was, which I thought was a brilliant talk, because it really provoked thought that some of you may not have really thought that far ahead with your solutions. And we all do this. We build a solution from the start, and the client says to you, right, I would like a system that holds a print docket. And you go, right, fine. So the first question we would ask, we've got a set of questions we ask any of our internal teams when they come to us and say we would like to develop something. So we always go back to them, and John and I spoke about this the other day when we were talking about this, is that we've got certain provoking questions we ask as developers. So if someone says, I'd like to store data, the first thing you ask them is like, well, how many records are you going to store a day? How many records are you going to store a week? How many records are you going to store a month? And 9 times out of 10, the client comes back and says, I don't know. So you then have to then think, right, how am I going to build this solution? So if the client says to you, I think I'm going to do 10 prints I need to store a month, write a single file. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to cause you a problem. But it's knowing that data when you start, because breaking that data out becomes a bit of a challenge afterwards. So a lot of our questions we ask, we've got sets of questions like that to say, right, just to provoke thought to the client of where they're thinking the solution's going to go, where they think it will be in 1 month's time, 2 months' time, 6 months' time. And sometimes it's hard to see. You usually find that, as developers, we usually find that when they go, right, here's the first data set. And they say, we've got some products. And they go, right, you get partway through and say, well, could you give me a sample of the product? So you get a sample of the products, and that's fine. You get your 10 or 15. And then you start building what you're doing, and you have a look at it. And then you go back to the client and say, right, can you send us all the products? Like, oh, yeah, that'll take me a little while to download it. It doesn't fit in Excel. And you're like, what? That's over 1 million records. Right, okay. I didn't build it for 1 million records. And then you have to go back to the drawing board. So it's interesting to know where you sit with this. And I think where FileMaker's come since version 7 onwards with the multi-file and so forth is really good and really powerful, but do bear in mind of everything you do. And one of the slides I pulled out of John's presentation, which I will open and share, is this point of this unified approach, which I'm just going to literally share my screen. If I could find the bloody screen that had it on there. This one, here we go. So the thing I wanted to mention is on this is like the benefit of this unified approach, which is like the FileMaker single file method. So you've got a single file that's got all your security, all your access, and all your bits and pieces in it. I would always lean towards a single file as much as possible. I know it seems weird for me to say with the amount of systems that I've got running, but I would always lean towards that, with the understanding of you've asked those questions at the start and you've thought about the process of what you've built. You've provoked that thought from the client to then say to them, look, where is it needs to go? We made that decision. We asked those questions for all of our teams that we do anything we're working on. And when we launched the website, our website, so Forbidden Planet, we launched the website and then we started doing sales online. I asked that question then, and this is going back 8-9 years ago. Maybe 10 years ago, we started pulling that information through FileMaker. And I said, well, where do you think it's going to go? And they said, well, at the moment, we've got an online business of about 1,000 customers that regularly order from us, and they come back every month. And we worked out it was about, I don't know, 1,000 orders a month. That was it. And we thought, fine, okay, can we hold that amount? How long do you need to hold the data for? What's the retention period? And I looked at it for, I'll just hold it in one file. It's easy enough. It's not a problem. That was fine for about 6 years. It was in one file. Yes, I did the routine scripting within this to go, right, okay, we'll purge data, we'll archive data. So I created an archive file, which is a duplicate of the file. I did the classic thing we all do. Let's trim the main file to make it run efficiently and move the file over. Every weekend, it moves a load of files from one to the other. That's the way we worked years ago. Then things continue. And then what took off was the fact that we were then creating, on average, I don't know, 10,000 dockets a day. And you're like, well, okay, right, now I'm holding a PDF version of the docket in a file, and I've got 10,000 records a day. And you go, right, okay, where's this going to go? And then you realize, right, okay, I've got to do external storage. So you turn external storage on, and you think, fine. And so I've made my file really small, get external storage. Then you've got the headache, how the hell do I back it up? How do I move the data? So it's about that process of listening to initially what the client said, and then us developers going, well, the client is completely wrong. The brief has now changed. Everything's changed from the structure of it. And we are constantly doing this. And I'm sure some of you are doing the same thing with your clients, and it all works out the same way. We've now taken the approach that we will probably build anything in a separate file now. And I know it sounds a weird approach. So we've gone full circle from when FileMaker 7 came out, which we had a single file. We're moving down that path, even though we have multi-file. It was then the point of that was the best approach. Now we're looking at it just going, we've learned our mistakes and errors with the multi-file. This then poses a problem with your servers. And this is the headache we're getting to, because if you look at your servers, you go, right, I can host 125 files on a server. Well, that's fine. Most people aren't going to have a problem with that. If you turn up with a medium-sized company, we're a big company that uses, well, not big company, we're a medium company, but we're a big FileMaker user base. From that point of view, you run out of space very quickly. Hence the reason why we've got 5 servers. The reason why we've got 5 servers is because our file count is vast. So you're probably all thinking, right, okay, if you're that amount, how the hell do you manage it? How the hell do you manage the access controls? How do you deal with that? And that is a headache. I'm not knocking it. It is something you need to consider, but there are pros and cons of both. And I think what I wanted to discuss, and I wouldn't mind John's input on this because you did the presentation, is your standpoint of where you are with this. Is have we gone too far? Have we not gone far enough? And I think it's those sort of things you need to think about and work out what you're doing, because the small solution that you build today in 5 years' time may not be the same solution. The pandemic, for example, took online growth in 1 year, 5 years forward. And that's what happened. So everyone that had an online store literally moved technology-wise 5 years forward in 1 year. It was a nightmare because the retail industry of the shops were shut. So only people could go to online. That was the only option they had. So you had to make sure your system could grow and build to that level. We had that headache in basically 2020. It was 6 months of constant rewriting of stuff because the growth was just catching up. It was just overtaking it. Yes, admittedly, that slowed down a bit now because retail's back open again, but we had to deal with that. So it really opened our eyes to go, well, we need solutions and systems that can adjust and build that quickly and change that quickly. So you've got to start thinking of how you move this data. And that's one of the things I wanted just to have a little discussion of where people sit, where they've got discussion points on. Have you got experiences in the past that you've come across the same problems? I'm just curious how you approach them. The docket side of stuff, I come back to what John was saying, and I think it was Paul that mentioned it about getting the file count of the container fields. I did a thing where I tried to move our dockets from our server from one to another because I was testing FileMaker 19.6 because we're still running FileMaker 18. I've not moved to 19 yet because I haven't worked out to do it. And I told Windows to go copy from the FileMaker server the container data. An hour and a half later, it had come back with 2.5 million files it wanted to copy. And that was just one database of external storage. So, and as I said, I've got lots of databases across that, and Windows was literally calculating for hours, and I didn't even start the copy. Yeah, I hadn't even started. It was just calculating. So I gave up. So now I've come up with a different idea of doing it, which is, I mean, VMware. So I'm just going to unshare the whole VMware drive and mount it on the new server. So I'm going to replicate in VMware the files. So get VMware to dupe the whole drive to a new VMDK file, copy that to the new server and just file open it. So it's 1,000 times quicker doing that. We've tested it and it works. So there's ways and means to deal with that file set. If you put that in a single file, I have done a check on the side of that file. It'll be something around about 250 gig, a single file. So I don't even know if FileMaker would go that high. I'm assuming it will. It says it will. But I haven't got the time or the effort to then go into file. Imagine doing this on a client, go into the file and say, external data storage, bring it to internal, go. You'd press the button, you'd be there for a week while it went off and did it. so there's something you've got to look at, something you need to consider if you start building these bigger solutions. So that was one of the things I wanted to mention. So because I never got a chance to discuss it at the event when John did it. Anyone's got any questions, anything they want to ask, please shout.
Actually, I have something. I've done something in the past. It's been 3 or 4 years ago, so it's quite vague. I'm trying to access the system right now because it's. I think it would be very interesting to found it without records. Anyhow, they changed the system. I still have access. You should change your passwords, by the way, regularly. But yeah, I think I can. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just hide client's logo. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
So this used to be a very big list of archive. This is a retention policy. Actually, let's get it from start. The owner of this company is an engineer with a PhD, and he's the first person that is doing wholesale, but he also has a PhD. He's a great person, and he was so intelligent. He said, "Okay, start this." So we have put a lot of effort and money in this system. What will happen in 3, 6, 8 years? We want to be, we want it to be viable like forever. And I ended up building that, which I will not, this is a production, by the way. I will not play a lot with that. Basically, the idea here was that in a script schedule, there are some scripts that populate all tables and all fields and how many records there are per table, how many containers. So the container size that our friend Paul asked. So what I did here is I counted how many containers are filled. I didn't count them. I didn't do a file size. It wasn't an actual count, but I did a provision count. So I took an average of every container, and it was an approximate. It could be very off, but it was a rule of thumb of how much size, how much data there is there. That's why I called it data provision. Some other things, and then this is the retention policy. So you could run a script. Great. So this populates all scripts that are prefixed with SPA, which I don't remember what stands for. But the idea here is that the retention policy is do not archive, keep only current year plus X, and archive only flagged. So the idea here was that every every 1st of January, this script ran. Obviously didn't go very well because this was full of tables and things to run. And basically the system every 1st of January would go and say, okay, which records do I need to keep? And it would, there's another FileMaker file. It's just an archive file that all records go there. So you could access the records manually. And then you would also say, okay, while you're when you, or before, I'm not sure, I don't remember, but before or after this archiving process is done, also run this script. So for example, this that closes stock transactions is basically, it's closing all balances for all stock and it initiates all products for the next year. So the accountants can get a cost of sales good, the COGS. And records archived. This is a big execute SQL if I record. No, yeah. Yeah, and this is the primary ID field. Obviously, the naming convention wasn't great here. Wasn't done by me, by the way. But basically, based on the primary key, you would archive those records. So because it was a big, just imagine a NoSQL database, it was a big graph document database, let's say, and every record would be a big JSON. And that is how it was built. I'm afraid to click this button. Don't
click it. Don't click it. It's not. Don't do it. If you don't know, don't click it.
No, no, it does the archive. I will not click it. Yeah. So, so basically, what we ended up doing here was the client. It was thanks to the client that I did that. It was so beautiful because he had in mind that the records need to have a recycling process. They get in, they live in the system, and they need to die. They need to go away somehow in a nice flow. And yeah, this is something relevant to what you said, Gary.
I think that's it. I think every time you come up with a scenario where you just push the boundaries of FileMaker or you'll find a different way, as I say, with tools like that, you can probably snapshot, you could use to find other ways of holding records of that data in an archive nowadays. But I agree, back then that was the way to do it. And I've got a similar thing with our transactional records. We dump all our transactional records into an archive exactly the same way, just to clean the file up and just keep it ready for the next year or next month or whatever. And when the pandemic hit, as I say, that growth that happened so quickly, I then realized, oh, well, I'm going to run the archive every week because it's just taken off. This is ridiculous. We used to archive every quarter or every 6 months, and now we're doing it every week. It's just madness. So you go back and you rewrite that process, or you then realize, hold on, I'm holding all this data in the record that I don't need anymore. So I know I'll push it to another file. And this is what we constantly are actively doing. We're looking at that core file that's got the, I don't know, 100 fields in it, it's functional, it does what it needs to do. We go, well, does it need that? We'll grab this bit of data out, put it to a new file, grab this bit of data, put it to extract that from the file. And when you start disseminating your databases up like that, you then realize your backups are quicker, everything just functions. It just, the little headaches you may have had are a problem. I will say though, as I say, the account management is a massive headache. I mean, it's huge. We've got 200 users. So when you've got 200 users and one user said, I like access to the system, you're like, well, okay, yeah, that's 70 files I've got to give you access to. So we've got a database management that we do. We've got a script step that we put at the start of every single file. So we can go to a database manager and go, right, this solution is these 15 files, add this user, add these credentials, press go, and it then creates all the user accounts into those files and it's okay, and it's managed. There are ways and means, there's ways around it. But it's just, yeah, if you've got any systems out there that have been sitting there for 7 or 8 years and just sitting idle, go have a look at them. Just that's all I would say. Have a look. If you've done it in a single file, do the client a bit of favor because they're probably going, they don't even know. They're just sitting there going, well, the backups take 4 hours. That's what we thought it takes. Like, no, it shouldn't. The backup should be quicker than that. So our longest backups we do at the moment is half an hour, and that's way too long for me. I want it quicker than that, to be honest. So I'm hoping parallel backups give me that, but we'll see. I'll cross that bridge when I update. So Anyhow, that was the little bit snippet I wanted to provoke thought and let you know. And if you didn't see John's session, it's on the FMBug YouTube. It was basically FMBug 65 September edition. So have a look at it, watch it. It's worthwhile. If you missed it, go back, go and have a look. It's really provoke thought. Very good. Where are we, Jul?
We are. We've got half an hour to run before the virtual bar. Technically, we could be there sooner. Is there anything else that anyone wants to add based around what Gary and John have been talking about, and Status Eket as well? I don't know if people want to have a little bit of an open discussion about this and perhaps say what their favored admin techniques are, or if they got any views on files, multiple, single, or whatever. We could have a few minutes on that, so feel free to jump in and say something. I could talk briefly about what I was going to talk about, but I haven't got the demo up and running. I just haven't had time to do it.
Save that for next time. Sure. Save it for next time.
Okay.
That's right. I do have one really quick question for John. And John, with your archive, when you run the backups, you then zip them and basically upload them to Wasabi. I'm assuming is what you're doing. Yeah, and then you're probably storing some of those as immutable copies.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess my question is around when you're doing the zipping of the backups. Have you found that causes any performance problems on FileMaker server, or are you doing that kind of in the middle of the night?
Middle of the night, but obviously that's shell script stuff that's doing that. So the worst case scenario is a client that does indeed have lots of stored PDFs, but that are externally held. But you do want to zip of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because they do need to be able to get
back.
Yeah,
what I found with my testing was that I kind of made the mistake of running Punisher, the large copy on the file, and then running the backup and then running a zip. And what I found was the zip process was consuming essentially all of the available CPU that the computer had, which the FileMaker admin console didn't seem very happy about.
No, I'm doing it in a definite out of hours the next morning.
Okay.
No, clearly that, if you're running a 24/7 business, then there are. I think with the stuff I talked about on the multiple files, this is about us going, what are the available tools to us? What are the downsides of using that methodology? If the methodology is good enough, that doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's good enough. Carry on doing it. If not, as you said, if you're running a 24/7 business, you can't suddenly take all of the CPU for 2 hours because somebody will be complaining. We're going to need to find a different methodology for doing it. Considering what does rsync give us from Linux as a method of copying files across? So you're doing more copies, but you're not doing it as a zip. Do you push off
it's the trade-off CPU versus network traffic.
Yeah. So everything, you're the right person to say that, but everything's a trade-off. In terms of what you're doing. What we're trading off is something for the bonus of having an external backup, ultimately, which actually we believe is the better thing to do, even if there's a performance hit. Having it as an external backup so that if the hard drive blows up, I have in fact got something somewhere else, and if necessary, spin up another server and just move those files over, and we have a quicker recovery for somebody. So all of those trade-offs, using the tools that I can write or I can learn. I'm not I'm not convinced I have the best solution, but I do know it works. And at this moment in time, for the customers I'm doing it with, it works well enough. So, you know, leave it alone until
can I add
starts
one thing? Can I add one thing to that? Is the fact that I think if you're thinking, Ian, that you've got a large amount of container data, I think the first thing is regardless of getting it to Wasabi, I'd take that out of the equation. And challenge yourself. I would look at it from an approach, right? How do I get this data onto another device, machine? Yeah. How do I move it from machine A to machine? Because then if you can then put it to machine A to machine B with if you use something like sync.com, you can then create a web class folder and then drip feed that through as the backup runs. When you get it onto machine B, you can take all the resource to then zip it and send it.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
To be honest,
you take
actually,
it off the server.
Yeah, actually, in these particular files, the container data, I'm not using FileMaker containers. Basically, it's all being stored in either S3 or Wasabi or DigitalOcean, but essentially S3 compatible storage already. So that's
so if you're in that sort of way, if you can snapshot, as I said that we were doing with ours, is if you can snapshot it in some way, shape, or form using Amazon's tools, if you can snapshot that somewhere else and then get your archiving server to open up that snapshot that you've created, you can now let that machine do all the heavy lifting and the zipping, and your FileMaker server's over here, okay, just merrily going along as it normally would do, and you do that process. It depends how you can move that data to the secondary machine to kill the CPU. As I said, I can't do a get file size on the folder in Windows; it just kills it. So I've got to put it somewhere else. So I'd look at an rsync maybe a way. If you've got a mounted volume somewhere else on another machine that you can rsync it to, rsync will only take the change files. So therefore, you could then rsync just every week or every day or every hour the changes to that solution and then put it out to Wasabi.
Yeah.
I think the issue is around, so let's go, you know, essentially Gary's running quite a large system, I've heard. The question is, for us working with clients who have something much smaller and have a simpler server setup, although they have kind of complex file, and they're not in AWS and they're not doing this and they're not doing this, so those things are not available to them. How far can we gain the benefits of a work practice to give something much better to people who don't necessarily have all the dedicated resources, either in terms of time, money, and extra staff to do it? For me, that's part of the issue always, is how do we up the level of security, up the level of backups, up the level of this for some of our small but growing customers in a way that's efficient and kind of helpful when they don't have access to some of that other stuff and the dedicated time and resources to do it. That feels like us offering value to those kind of customers that are valuable customers that have good quality data, but you know, don't have £10,000 a week to spend on backup.
Yeah, I agree.
It's
finding the right fit. It's finding the right fit for the client.
Yeah, let me jump in there, and I like the idea of being mindful of people's economics, and one of the most economic pieces of an overall backup strategy that I like is FireWire drives and/or USB drives are relatively inexpensive, and we've used them for many years as part of our count how many disks this data is on strategy. I did it just last week for a particular customer that their data was on internal disk, internal to, I don't even want to say what kind of computer was running, but you know, shortly thereafter was on an external USB and also on a different external USB. I like external because if the machine stops working, I don't have to disassemble it to get it to hard drive and put it in a hard drive dock. You know, and then of course go beyond that, and that gives us a pretty good improvement in their risk reward profile at an economic cost. And then beyond that, we then look to see if they have a file server infrastructure perhaps pipelined out to an external, or if not, we will, dust off the scripts that we have that run under LaunchD and or PowerShell, depending on the platform, obviously, and see if we can pipe it up to S3, which is, of course, wonderful. It's offsite, but it's pretty darn slow to get it back. So the locals are terrific if you want to get your data back quick, and the offsite is back if there's a disaster at a particular physical location. But yes, economic for the customer. Anyway, carry on.
So I was just thinking of one customer from within the last year, and Mark, you'll know who this is, but it's somebody who is basically storing, it sounds like the archive of all the materials from a fairly well-known rock star. Basically, their FileMaker database essentially was, it sounds like it was all stored on probably a single hard drive in somebody's flat somewhere in London. And if her flat ever burned down or got robbed, this would all just would have been gone. So
that's scary to know. That is
yes,
scary to know that people are doing
really.
that. That's not right.
No.
Cloud storage is cheap. Use it. Right. Where are we? We got anything else, or are we at capacity? And I'm going to turn the recording off.
I think we should probably, unless anyone jumps up in the next few seconds, I think we should probably turn the recording off and move to the virtual file.
Paul raised his hand.
I was just wanted to chip in on the backup stuff, really. We have a number of relatively small customers who are using small Linux instances with FileMaker Server on, and they're not particularly technically literate, shall we say. So the approach we've taken for them is that we have a Linux admin machine, and we use an rsync script to sync. Now let me go back one. We have an overnight backup which keeps 0 copies, so therefore there's only ever 1 copy there, and the name of the folder stays the same. You don't get the dates appended to it and everything. And then we use rsync to sync those onto our admin server. And the folder that they go into on our admin server happens to have a UI on it, and that is the folder that is the Dropbox folder. And so the admin server syncs them up to Dropbox, and then we can share that Dropbox folder with the customer so they can have a local on-site backup in their office that they can access easily. And we found that to be quite popular with smaller, less technically literate customers.
I agree. And the advantage you have with using a tool like that, whether you use Dropbox, sync.com, is you'll get version control on the backups that you're putting up there. So you've then got snapshots of the version. If they go and delete it for whatever reason, if they had access privilege to delete and maintain their backups, you go, well, we can bring it back from the version control. That's fine. I agree. They're definitely, if you've got someone who's a Google client and they've paid for the mid-level of Google Workspace, you've got 2 terabytes of storage for every user in the company. So most companies don't even know that exists, and then they go, "Oh, I've got 100 terabytes of storage," and you're not creating a backup. Seriously, come on! Not even paying for the storage, just use it. So, and that's exactly the way you could mount the Google Shared Drive, Dropbox. Sync doesn't really matter.
We found rsync been really good because you get the the incremental file list of what's changed, and even the customers who've got tens of thousands of files because they're doing in secure storage, it's really quick because there's not much has changed. There's never more than maybe even if it's 1,000 what do you call it, chunks of container data of the day. It doesn't take that long for rsync to pull that over from one Linux machine to another. So
that's definitely something that I'm going to be looking at when I move away from Windows. So, I don't want to stay on Windows anymore.
Our other experience has been that we've got a number of Windows servers as well, and I find Windows Update is driving me mad because I don't know about you, but sometimes I can do a Windows Update in half an hour. But I've had Windows updates that have just failed over and over again, and it's taken me like 4 hours to get it to work with about 1 million reboots, you know.
We got the same thing, and Tony, I come to you in 2 seconds, mate. I know you raised your hand. From Windows update that we had, yeah, we do have patching, as every company should do, regularly patch if you've got Windows servers. And you're right, you can have a Windows update that you run on most of our servers. We've got lots of servers that we run them on, and you set yourself up for the evening's work. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work,
and it takes ages. And you find out that Windows decided to release an incompatible version that's running SMB because they patched it, and then you have to undo the version, and then you go, right, okay, fine. Read what's in the update. Don't apply your update in the first week of Windows coming out. This is a bit of advice I'm going to give everybody. If Windows patch on their patch Tuesday, don't patch until 2 weeks after, because 9 times out of 10, Windows fix it the following week. So it's best to be 2 weeks away from when they put the patch in, because it will save you an absolute headache. So it's worth doing. Tony, shoot, man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you. One other piece to the story that I forgot that's worth recording here is I didn't set up this server. I did get a phone call when it stopped working. And the reason it stopped working is they'd added a file, and the internal, there was backups running to the boot drive. And the amount of volume increased, and then the boot drive filled up and stopped working. So the obvious fix, which I implemented, was to turn off the backups to the boot drive, because I didn't have the infrastructure in place to monitor available disk space, nor did I want to. In other words, don't run your backups to the boot drive if you can't avoid it. Run it to an external partition or an external drive, because if it fills up, it stops working, and then you get a phone call, not necessarily a happy one. Okay,
agreed.
That completes my story from last week.
Mm-hmm. We also have a script that runs after the rsync that remotely queries all the small Linux servers and checks the disk space for all the partitions on it. Oh,
and Paul, that's absolutely awesome. I mean, that kind of internal DevOps infrastructure monitoring is gold.
Yeah,
it's not always something that you have available at your fingertips.
Yeah, I did work with Linux about 30 years ago, and I'd forgotten everything I ever knew. And so over the last year or so, I've been kind of relearning, and it's actually it's okay. It's really okay. Yeah.
No, I mean it's all good stuff. You know, the stuff that you can run from the Unix command line on the Mac. We've done a fair bit on the Mac, running from launchd, running headless and stuff like that. You know, difficult the first time, easier the second time. But certainly you want to monitor. Absolutely, you know, the more you monitor, the safer you are, especially if it's run to a central dashboard.
Yeah. Yeah, so we do everything through on the actual production servers with SSH and no graphical interface, or not even a user login and password. So we do it all through SSH terminal.
Good stuff.
You know, and it's been great. And Ansible, we use Ansible a lot. It's fantastic. Really good.
Well, we can all see about that when Ian does his talk next time.
Yeah.
Double header.
Actually, maybe Paul should do the talk.
Oh, I know.
I think that change in behavior on backups, either in the very latest version that's been released or is about to be coming, when you save 0 backups. Doug may want to correct me on this one, which is to do with, I think the change in behavior is going to be that 0 backups will do the full backup, and only when it's completed will it then delete the previous one that you didn't want to keep. And so that puts some people at risk of chewing up hard disk space that they thought they didn't need, because by keeping 0 backups, in theory, you think you're just updating stuff.
So you could end up with 2 copies rather than 1 on that disk partition, effectively.
Initially, yes. I think that's coming in a just around the corner version as opposed to the version that's here. But that's actually quite a big change in behavior for some people. If you're
definitely.
If you're tight on space, that's just a heads up.
Can I just ask a question of what this? So you're saying currently at the moment it will back the on and then put a new one on there. And you're saying they're changing the behavior to create a copy and then clear. Because I don't think that's the case.
Yes,
I may be
if
wrong.
If the backup fails, you may end up with something that isn't a proper backup because it hasn't actually done the job. Now, the advantage
if you cancel the backup, okay.
Right.
The advantage is that the change in behavior around clone means that instead of creating a backup and then creating a clone from the backup it created, it will create a clone straight away. So you are in fact saving disk space there. But
See, we always hold more than one backup on the server anyhow, so we have two sessions always
but it's
for
around
that reason. But you're right. If you're on 0, then that's an issue.
It's just, I think it's a change in behaviour that's somebody has flagged up that I did read about just recently. Just passing that on.
We'll definitely have to keep an eye on that. Yeah.
Okay, shall we wrap up, Jul?
Yeah, I can't see any more hands up, so. Yep, I think we can we'll stop the recording and move on to the virtual bar. We're only 10 minutes off anyway, so go ahead, Gary.